The stars were quiet that night. They always were in the outer rim, far from the busy shipping lanes and crowded colonies of human space. Out here, there was nothing but darkness, silence, and the endless void that stretched between galaxies. Commander Tiho Park stood alone on the observation deck of the UNSV Horizon's Edge, his hands clasped behind his back as he watched the stars drift slowly past. He was a tall man with tired eyes and gray hair at his temples. 20 years in the United Nations Space Force had given him those gray hairs. 20 years of patrols, battles, rescues, and losses. He had seen enough of space to know that it was beautiful and terrible in equal measure. The Horizon's Edge was a good ship, not the biggest or the fastest, but reliable. Her crew of 240 souls had become like family to Tiho over the past 3 years. They trusted him to keep them safe, and he did his best to honor that trust every single day. Tonight was supposed to be like any other night, a routine patrol along the outer rim, checking for pirates, smugglers, and the occasional distress signal from a stranded freighter. Nothing exciting, nothing dangerous. But the universe had other plans. The door behind Tiho slid open with a soft hiss. He turned to see Lieutenant Hana Yoon hurrying toward him, a datapad clutched in her hands. Hana was young, barely 30, with sharp eyes and a quick mind. She was the ship's xenolinguistics officer, responsible for translating alien languages and decoding strange signals. Most days her job was boring. Today was not most days. "Commander," she said, slightly out of breath, "we picked up something strange. You need to hear this." Tiho took the datapad from her hands and looked at the screen. It showed a waveform pattern he did not recognize. The frequency was wrong. The modulation was unlike anything human ships used. "What am I looking at?" he asked. "A distress signal," Hana said, "but not from any human vessel. The encoding matches Velani communication protocols." Tiho's eyebrows rose. The Velani were one of the first alien species humanity had made contact with about 20 years ago. They were gentle creatures, standing about 4 feet tall with translucent blue skin and 4 delicate arms. Their bodies were fragile, their bones hollow like birds. They had no weapons, no armies, no concept of war. They were traders and artists, philosophers and dreamers. The idea of violence was as foreign to them as breathing underwater was to humans. "Play it," Tiho said. Hana tapped the screen. For a moment there was only static. Then a voice came through, thin and trembling, speaking in the musical tones of the Velani language. Hana had already translated it, and she read the words aloud as the recording played. "They are harvesting us. They came from the dark between stars. They take our children. They kill our elders. Please, anyone who hears this, help us. We are dying. Please help." The recording ended. Silence filled the observation deck. Tiho stared at the datapad for a long moment. His jaw was tight. His hands were steady, but inside something cold was spreading through his chest. He had heard distress calls before. He had responded to emergencies, rescued survivors, and recovered bodies. But there was something about this message that cut deeper than the others. Maybe it was the fear in the voice. Maybe it was the word harvesting. "Where is it coming from?" he asked. "The Velcora system," Hana said. "The Velani homeworld. It is about 3 days away at maximum speed." "That is outside our patrol zone." "Yes, Commander." Tiho handed the datapad back to her. "Wake the senior staff. I want everyone in the briefing room in 15 minutes." Hana nodded and hurried away. Tiho turned back to the window and looked at the stars once more. Somewhere out there, in the cold darkness of space, innocent beings were being slaughtered, and someone was asking for help. He had taken an oath when he joined the Space Force, an oath to protect humanity and uphold peace. But he had also made a promise to himself, long ago, when he was just a young cadet with dreams of exploring the stars. He had promised that if he ever had the power to help someone in need, he would do it, no matter the risk, no matter the cost. The briefing room was crowded when Tiho arrived. His senior officers were already seated around the long table, their faces tired but alert. Chief Engineer Minyu Beak was nursing a cup of coffee, his gray beard uncombed. Security Chief Yoonji Shin sat with her arms crossed, her expression hard and focused. Medical Officer Do-Yun Kang was reviewing something on his datapad, his brow furrowed with concern. Tiho stood at the head of the table and played the distress signal for them. When it ended, no one spoke for several seconds. Harvesting, Minyu said quietly. What does that mean? Slavery, Yoonji said. Her voice was flat but her eyes were burning. It means someone is taking them as slaves, or worse. The Vellani cannot fight, Do-Yun said. Their bodies are too fragile. They have no military, no weapons. If someone is attacking them, they have no way to defend themselves. Do we know who is doing this? Minyu asked. Hana shook her head. The signal does not say, but there are rumors in the intelligence reports about a species called the Korath. They are a slaver empire from the far side of the galaxy. They have conquered dozens of worlds and taken millions of beings as property. And now they have found the Vellani, Yoonji said. Silence fell over the room again. Everyone was thinking the same thing, but no one wanted to say it. Finally, Minyu spoke. Commander, the Velcora system is outside our jurisdiction. If we go there, we will be operating without authorization. High Command might not approve. Tiho looked at his old friend. They had served together for 15 years, survived 3 wars and countless battles. Minyu was not a coward. He was simply stating the facts. You are right, Tiho said. We do not have authorization. We do not have backup. We do not even know what we will find when we get there. He paused and looked around the table at each of his officers. But I did not join the Space Force to follow rules while innocent people die. I joined because I believed that humanity could be better, that we could be the ones who stand up when others cannot. He placed his hands flat on the table and leaned forward. The Vellani helped us when we first ventured into the stars. They shared their knowledge, their star maps, their friendship. They asked for nothing in return except peace. And now they are crying out for help, and we are the only ones who heard them. Yoonji uncrossed her arms. What are your orders, Commander? Tiho straightened up. Set a course for Velcora, maximum speed, and tell the crew to prepare for combat. No one argued. No one hesitated. They simply stood, saluted, and went to their stations. As the horizon's edge turned toward the distant stars of the Velcora system, Tiho remained in the briefing room alone. He looked at the datapad in his hand, at the waveform of the distress signal still displayed on the screen. Hold on, he said quietly to no one and everyone. We are coming. The engines roared to life, and the ship leaped into the darkness. The horizon's edge dropped out of faster-than-light travel on the edge of the Velcora system, and for a moment, no one on the bridge could speak. Commander Tiho Park stood at the center of the command deck, his eyes fixed on the main view screen. Behind him, his crew worked silently at their stations, but he could feel their shock. He could hear their quiet gasps and whispered curses, because what they were seeing was not a planet. It was a graveyard. Velcora had once been beautiful. The intelligence reports described it as an ocean world, covered in warm blue seas and scattered with green islands where the Vellani built their graceful cities. The Vellani loved beauty. They created art and music. They studied the stars and wrote poetry about the cosmos. They were peaceful, kind, and completely defenseless. Now their world was burning. From orbit, Tiho could see the fires, hundreds of them scattered across the planet's surface like wounds. Thick columns of black smoke rose from the islands, spreading into the atmosphere and darkening the sky. The blue oceans were stained with ash. The green forests were gone, replaced by charred wastelands. And above the dying world, like vultures circling a corpse, hung the harvester ships. There were dozens of them, massive vessels, each one several kilometers long, with hulls made of dark metal and covered in strange symbols. They were ugly ships, built for function rather than beauty, designed to carry cargo. But the cargo they carried was not goods or materials. It was people, living beings taken from their homes and packed into the holds like animals. "Those are Korath ships," Hana Yun said from her station. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "The symbols match the intelligence reports, the Korath Dominion." Yunji Shin stepped up beside Tiho, her hand resting on the weapon at her hip. "How many ships do they have?" 47, the tactical officer reported, plus an unknown number of ground forces. Minyu Beak shook his head slowly. "We are one ship against 47. Commander, this is not a fight we can win." Tiho did not answer. He was still staring at the viewscreen, at the burning world and the ships that circled it like predators. He thought about the distress signal, the trembling voice, the word harvesting. He thought about the Vellani, those gentle creatures who had welcomed humanity with open arms when they first reached the stars. "We are not here to win a war," he said finally. "We are here to save lives. Launch a shuttle, security team and medical personnel. We are going down there." The shuttle cut through the smoke-filled atmosphere and descended toward the largest island on the planet. According to the sensors, this was where the main Vellani city had stood. It was also where the largest concentration of life signs remained. Security Chief Yunji Shin led the ground team. She had handpicked her soldiers for this mission. Sergeant Yuna Im, a fierce woman with steady hands and sharper eyes, and Sergeant Sunwoo Cho, a quiet man who never missed a shot. Behind them came the medical team, led by Do-Yun Kang himself. When the shuttle doors opened, they stepped out into hell. The city was gone. What remained was rubble and ash. Buildings that had once reached toward the sky now lay in broken heaps. The streets were filled with debris and the air was thick with smoke and the smell of burning. But worst of all were the sounds, the crying, the screaming, the desperate wails of beings who had lost everything. "Move out," Yunji ordered. "Find survivors, stay alert." They made their way through the ruins, weapons raised, eyes scanning for threats. It did not take long to find what they were looking for. The processing center was set up in what had once been a public square. The Korath had built metal cages in neat rows, and inside those cages were the Vellani. Hundreds of them, packed together so tightly they could barely move. Their translucent blue skin was bruised and dirty. Their forearms hung limp at their sides. Their large, dark eyes were filled with terror. And standing among the cages were the Korath themselves. They were large creatures, standing nearly 8 feet tall, with thick gray skin and 4 powerful arms. Their faces were flat, with small eyes and wide mouths filled with sharp teeth. They wore black armor and carried weapons that crackled with energy. They moved through the cages with casual cruelty, inspecting their prisoners like farmers inspecting livestock. Yunji raised her fist, and her team stopped. They took cover behind a pile of rubble and watched. A Korath overseer approached one of the cages. Inside was a Vellani child, a small creature barely 2 feet tall, shivering with fear. The overseer reached through the bars and grabbed the child by one of its delicate arms. The child cried out in pain, and its mother screamed from the next cage. The overseer pulled the child out of the cage and threw it to the ground. It raised a plasma whip in its hand, the weapon glowing with deadly heat. "Defective," the overseer growled in a deep, rumbling voice. "Too small, no value." It raised the whip to strike. The shot rang out before anyone could react. Sergeant Yuna Im lowered her rifle, her face completely calm. The overseer stood frozen for a moment, a neat hole between its eyes, and then it fell backward onto the ground. Dead. For a heartbeat, everything was silent. Then chaos erupted. The Korath soldiers spun toward the sound of the shot, weapons raised. They saw the humans emerging from the rubble and their eyes went wide with confusion. These were not Vellani. These were something else, something they did not recognize. "What are they?" one of the Korath shouted. "Kill them," another roared. The battle was short and brutal. The Korath were bigger, stronger, and better armed. Their plasma weapons could burn through metal, and their armor could stop most projectiles. By all logic, they should have won easily. But they had never fought humans before. They had never faced a species that evolved on a world where everything wanted to kill them. A world with crushing gravity, extreme temperatures, deadly predators, and toxic plants. A world that created beings who could run for hours without stopping, who could survive injuries that would kill other species instantly, who could push through pain and exhaustion and keep fighting long after they should have fallen. Yunji took a plasma blast to her shoulder. The heat burned through her armor and seared her flesh. Any other species would have dropped their weapon and collapsed in agony. Yunji gritted her teeth, switched her rifle to her other hand, and kept shooting. Sunwoo was hit in the leg. The wound would have crippled a Korath for weeks. Sunwoo dropped to one knee, steadied his aim, and put 3 rounds into the chest of the enemy in front of him. Yuna moved through the battlefield like a ghost, appearing and disappearing, each shot finding its target with deadly precision. The Korath had conquered 100 worlds. They had crushed empires and enslaved billions, but they had never met anything like this. When the last Korath fell, Yunji stood in the center of the square, breathing hard. Blood dripped from her wounded shoulder. Around her, the cages full of Velani prisoners stared in silent amazement. "Get these cages open," Yunji ordered, "and call the commander. Tell him we have found survivors." Do-yun and his medical team rushed forward, treating the wounded and freeing the prisoners. The Velani emerged from their cages slowly, their eyes wide with disbelief. They looked at the human soldiers, at the dead Korath on the ground, and they did not understand. One of them, an elder with faded blue skin and wise, ancient eyes, approached Yunji. He looked up at her, his 4 hands clasped together in a gesture of gratitude. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice trembling. Yunji looked down at him. Her face was hard, but her eyes were gentle. "We are humans," she said. "We heard your call and we came." The elder began to cry. Great, silent tears rolled down his translucent cheeks. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you." Yunji turned away and touched the communication device in her ear. "Commander," she said, "we have liberated the processing center, but this is bigger than we thought. The Korath are not just raiding. They are conducting a full-scale harvest. There are millions of Velani on this planet, and the Korath mean to take them all." On the bridge of the horizon's edge, Tiho listened to her report. His face was pale, but his voice was steady. "Understood," he said. "Secure the survivors and prepare for evacuation. I am contacting Earth." He turned to the communications officer. "Open a channel to High Command, Priority 1. Tell them what is happening here." He paused and took a deep breath. "And tell them that humanity has a choice to make." The message from the horizon's edge reached Earth in less than 6 hours. By the time the sun rose over the United Nations headquarters in Geneva, the entire planet was watching. The footage was difficult to see. Images of burning cities and smoke-filled skis. Videos of Velani prisoners packed into metal cages like animals. Audio recordings of screams and cries for help. And through it all, the calm, steady voice of Commander Tiho Park, explaining what he had found at Velcora and what he believed humanity needed to do about it. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Protests erupted in cities around the world. Millions of people took to the streets, demanding action. The news networks played the footage on endless repeat, and commentators debated what humanity's response should be. Some called for diplomacy. Some called for caution, but most called for something else entirely. They called for justice. In the Great Hall of the United Nations, representatives from every nation on Earth gathered for an emergency session. The room was filled with tension as delegates argued and debated. Some warned about the risks of starting a war with an unknown alien empire. Others pointed out that humanity's military was not prepared for a full-scale conflict. Still others raised questions about jurisdiction and international law. But when the vote was called, the result was almost unanimous. Humanity would respond, not with words, not with diplomacy, with force. Admiral Jisuhan received her orders that same afternoon. She was 62 years old, with silver hair and eyes like steel. She had commanded the Second Fleet for 12 years and had never lost a battle. She was known throughout the Space Force as the Iron Admiral, a woman who never hesitated, never retreated, and never accepted defeat. When she read the orders on her datapad, she smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a hunter who had finally found her prey. "Mobilize the fleet," she said to her aide. "Every ship we have, we leave in 48 hours." The gathering of the fleet was a sight that humanity had never seen before. They came from every corner of human space: warships and carriers, frigates and destroyers, transports and support vessels. They came from Earth and Mars, from the colonies on Titan and Europa, from the distant outposts in the Alpha Centauri system. They came with their weapons loaded and their crews ready for war. At the center of the fleet was the dreadnought Sol's Fury, Admiral Hand's flagship. It was the largest warship humanity had ever built, nearly 2 kilometers long, bristling with weapons and armored with the strongest metals known to science. Beside it floated the carrier, Indomitable Spirit, capable of launching hundreds of fighter craft into battle. And surrounding them both were dozens of smaller ships, each one crewed by men and women who had volunteered for this mission. Captain Hyunwoo stood on the bridge of his ship, the cruiser Starfall, and watched the fleet assemble. He was 40 years old, with dark hair and a calm, focused expression. He had a reputation for impossible victories, for finding ways to win when all hope seemed lost. Some called him lucky, others called him brilliant. He called himself prepared. "It is beautiful, is it not?" said a voice beside him. Hyunwoo turned to see Commander Sora Lim, his second in command. She was small and quiet, with short black hair and clever eyes. Her specialty was electronic warfare, the art of disrupting enemy systems and turning their own technology against them. In the right hands, her skills could be more devastating than any weapon. "It is terrifying," Hyunwoo said honestly. "I have never seen so many ships in one place." "Neither has the rest of the galaxy," Sora replied. "They think we are a young species, barely out of our cradle. They think we are weak and primitive. They are about to learn how wrong they are." Within 72 hours, the fleet was ready. 47 warships, carrying over 100,000 soldiers and crew. It was the largest military force humanity had ever assembled, and it had been organized in less than 3 days. Before they departed, Admiral Han addressed the fleet over an open channel. Her voice was broadcast to every ship, heard by every man and woman who would fight in the battle to come. "Soldiers of humanity," she said, "you have all seen the footage from Velcora. You have seen what the Korath Dominion does to those who cannot defend themselves. They call it harvesting. They call it commerce. We call it murder." She paused, letting her words sink in. "The Velani are not our species. They are not our kin by blood, but they are our friends. They welcomed us when we first reached the stars. They shared their knowledge and their kindness without asking for anything in return. And now they are dying, crying out for someone to save them." Her voice hardened. "The galaxy thinks they know what humanity is. They think we are soft because we value peace. They think we are weak because we seek understanding before conflict. They are wrong. We did not crawl out of the mud and climb to the stars by being weak. We did not survive ice ages and plagues and wars by being soft. We are the children of a world that tried to kill us every single day, and we are still here." She leaned forward, her eyes blazing with determination. "The Korath wanted to know what humanity would do when the helpless cried for help. Today we answer them, not with words, not with warnings, with fire and fury and justice." A cheer erupted across the fleet. On every ship, soldiers raised their fists and shouted their approval. The sound echoed through the void of space, a promise and a threat. "Set course for Korath Prime," Admiral Han commanded. maximum speed, and open a channel to the Koreth Dominion. I want them to know we are coming." The message was broadcast on every frequency, designed to be heard by every Koreth ship, every Koreth outpost, every Koreth citizen. It was short and simple, and it burned itself into the memory of an entire empire. "This is Admiral Jisoo Han of the United Nations Space Force. We have witnessed your crimes at Velcora. We have seen the bodies of the innocent and heard the cries of the enslaved. You harvested a peaceful people like cattle. You butchered children and elders without mercy. You thought no one would answer their calls for help." Her voice dropped, becoming cold and hard as steel. "You were wrong. We are humanity. We are the species that refused to die. We are the children of a world that forged us in fire and blood, and we are coming for you. You have 48 hours to release every Velani prisoner and surrender your fleet. If you refuse, we will not negotiate. We will not bargain. We will destroy you. The choice is yours. Choose wisely." The message ended. The fleet jumped to faster-than-light speed, and the stars blurred around them. Across the galaxy, the Koreth Dominion received the transmission. For a moment, there was confusion. Who were these humans? Where had they come from? What made them think they could threaten the greatest slaver empire in the known universe? The Koreth High Council gathered in their fortress on Koreth Prime. They reviewed the intelligence on humanity, what little they had. A young species, barely a few hundred years into space travel. Their homeworld was a small, unimportant rock circling an ordinary star. They had no significant territory, no great fleets, no conquered vassals. The Koreth laughed. "Let them come," the High Counselor said, his voice dripping with contempt. "We will crush them as we have crushed all who opposed us, and when they are broken, we will add their world to our collection." The other counselors nodded in agreement. They had no doubt of their victory. They had never lost a war. They had never faced an enemy they could not defeat. But deep in the void, moving faster than thought, the human fleet was coming. And with them came something the Koreth had never encountered before. Vengeance. The human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Koreth system, and for a moment, the stars themselves seemed to hold their breath. Admiral Jisoo Han stood on the bridge of the Soul's Fury, her hands clasped behind her back, her eyes fixed on the viewscreen. Before her lay Koreth Prime, the heart of the slaver empire. It was a dark world, covered in gray clouds and dotted with the lights of massive industrial cities. Orbiting the planet was the Koreth home fleet, more than 100 warships arranged in a defensive formation. "They outnumber us 3-1, her tactical officer reported. "I can count," Jisoo replied calmly. "What is their formation?" "Standard defensive. Their flagship is at the center, protected by heavy cruisers on all sides. They are waiting for us to attack." Jisoo smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Then let us not disappoint them. Signal the fleet. Begin attack pattern Omega, and tell Captain Hyunwoo his time has come." The battle began with fire. Captain Hyunwoo No led the first wave, a squadron of fast attack cruisers that cut through space like knives. The Koreth opened fire immediately, their plasma cannons lighting up the darkness with deadly beams of energy. Ships exploded. Hulls ruptured. Crew members were blown into the void. But the humans did not stop. They did not retreat. They flew straight into the heart of the enemy formation, accepting losses that would have broken any other fleet. "All ships focus fire on Section 7, Hyunwoo ordered through gritted teeth. "We need to punch a hole in their line." Beside him, Commander Sora Lim worked her console with furious speed. Her fingers danced across the controls as she launched her electronic attack. "Targeting their flagship's communication systems," she said. "If I can shut them down, they will not be able to coordinate their defense." "Do it," Hyunwoo said. The cyber attack struck like an invisible blade. The Koreth flagship systems flickered and died, leaving the massive vessel blind and silent. For 90 critical seconds, the heart of the enemy fleet could not give or receive orders. 90 seconds of chaos. 90 seconds of opportunity. Hyunwoo seized the moment. All boarding parties launch now. Assault shuttles burst from the cruisers, screaming toward the disabled flagship. The Koreth tried to shoot them down, but with their coordination broken, their fire was scattered and ineffective. One by one, the shuttles reached the flagship's hull and burned their way inside. On the bridge of the Soul's Fury, Admiral Han watched the battle unfold. Her fleet was taking heavy losses. Ships were dying all around her, their crews giving their lives to break the enemy line. But they were winning. Slowly, painfully, they were winning. "Push forward," she commanded. "Do not give them time to recover. All batteries fire at will." The Soul's Fury unleashed its main weapons. Beams of concentrated energy tore through the darkness, striking Koreth ships with devastating force. Explosions blossomed like flowers of death. Debris scattered across the battlefield. The Koreth fleet, for the first time in its history, began to break. On the ground, the battle was even more brutal. Sergeant Yuna I.M. led the infantry assault on the capital city of Koreth Prime. Beside her were Sergeant Sunwoo Cho and nearly 1,000 human soldiers who had volunteered for what everyone called a suicide mission. None of them hesitated. None of them asked for an easier assignment. They knew what they were fighting for, and they were willing to die for it. The landing was rough. Anti-aircraft fire filled the sky, and many transports were shot down before they could reach the ground. But enough made it through. The soldiers poured out of their ships and charged into the streets of the alien city, weapons blazing. The Koreth defenders were waiting for them. Massive warriors in heavy armor, armed with plasma weapons and energy blades. They were bigger than humans, stronger than humans, and they had conquered 100 worlds. But they had never fought humans before. Yuna took a plasma bolt to the chest. Her armor absorbed most of the impact, but the force threw her backward and knocked the breath from her lungs. Any other species would have stayed down, waiting for medical attention. Yuna rolled to her feet, raised her rifle, and put 3 rounds into her attacker's face. Sunwoo was surrounded by 4 Koreth warriors. They were twice his size, their weapons crackling with energy. They expected him to surrender or flee. Instead, he drew his combat knife and charged. When the fight was over, Sunwoo was bleeding from a dozen wounds, but all 4 Koreth were dead. Behind the lines, medic Naeung-oh worked without rest. She moved from soldier to soldier, treating wounds that should have been fatal, keeping fighters alive long enough to get back into the battle. Her hands were covered in blood, both human and Koreth, and her eyes were hollow with exhaustion. But she did not stop. She could not stop. Too many people needed her. And in the shadows of the ruined city, Sniper Jihoon Cha hunted. He was a ghost, a whisper, a nightmare that the Koreth commanders could not escape. He moved through the broken buildings like smoke, setting up position after position, each one giving him a perfect view of his targets. His rifle was an extension of his body, his breathing slow and steady, his eye never leaving the scope. By the end of the first night, he had killed 17 Koreth commanders, 17 leaders who would never give another order, 17 holes in the enemy command structure. The Koreth were not prepared for this. They had conquered species that fought with honor, species that followed rules of engagement, species that surrendered when the battle was lost. Humans did none of these things. Humans fought with everything they had, using every trick, every strategy, every desperate measure they could imagine. They fought when they were wounded. They fought when they were dying. They fought until there was nothing left to fight with. On the bridge of the Soul's Fury, Admiral Han received word that the Koreth flagship had fallen. The boarding parties had taken the bridge, captured the commanders, and raised the United Nations flag in the heart of the enemy vessel. The Koreth fleet, leaderless and confused, was falling apart. "The Koreth High Council is requesting a ceasefire," her communications officer reported. "They want to negotiate." No negotiations, Jisoo said. Tell them to surrender unconditionally, or we will continue until there is nothing left to surrender. The message was delivered. For a long moment there was no response. Then, finally, the Korath High Counselor appeared on the view screen. He was a massive creature, even by Korath standards, with thick gray skin and small, calculating eyes. He was bleeding from a wound on his head, and his armor was scorched and damaged. Around him, his council chamber was in ruins. "What are you?" he demanded. His voice was filled with disbelief and something else, something that might have been fear. Admiral Han looked at the creature who had ordered the deaths of millions. "We are the species that evolved on a world that tried to kill us every single day," she said. "We survived plagues that wiped out billions. We survived ice ages that froze the planet. We survived predators that hunted us in the dark. We survived ourselves, even when we tried our hardest to destroy each other." She stepped closer to the screen. "We are the ones who looked at the stars and refused to stay on the ground. We are the ones who built ships to cross the void, who dreamed of things that seemed impossible, who never accepted that anything was beyond our reach." Her voice became cold. "We are humanity, and you made a terrible mistake. You attacked the helpless. You harvested the innocent. You thought that because the Velani could not fight back, no one would fight for them." She leaned forward, her eyes boring into the Korath leaders. "You were wrong." The High Counselor stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he bowed his head. "We surrender," he said. "The Korath Dominion surrenders." Admiral Han straightened. "Then lay down your weapons and prepare to face justice. Every Velani prisoner will be released immediately. Every slave from every world will be freed, and your leaders will stand trial for their crimes." She turned away from the screen. "This battle is over. The war is won." On the ground, the Korath soldiers dropped their weapons. On the ships in orbit, engines powered down and guns fell silent. The greatest slaver empire in the galaxy had fallen, brought low by a species they had never even heard of until a few days ago. And in the streets of the conquered city, Sergeant Unaiam looked up at the sky and saw the human fleet hanging among the stars like a constellation of hope. They had done it. Against all odds they had done it. But she knew that the hardest part was still to come. Winning the battle was one thing. Building a better future was something else entirely. In the weeks that followed the fall of the Korath Dominion, the galaxy watched in silent amazement as humanity did something no conquering species had ever done before. They helped. The Velani homeworld of Velcora was a ruin, but humanity refused to let it stay that way. Transport ships arrived carrying food, medicine, and building materials. Engineers came to rebuild the shattered cities. Doctors came to heal the wounded. Teachers came to open schools for the children who had lost everything. Dr. Doyun Kang led the medical effort on Velcora. He had not slept properly in days, moving from patient to patient in the crowded refugee camps, treating injuries and illnesses with whatever resources he could find. His eyes were red with exhaustion, and his hands ached from constant work. But every time he saved a life, every time he saw a Velani smile again, he found the strength to continue. One evening, an elderly Velani approached him in the medical tent. She was frail and thin, her translucent skin pale with age and suffering. She moved slowly, supported by two younger Velani, and her eyes were dim with tears. "You are the healer," she said in her soft, musical voice, "the one who works without rest." Doyun lowered his head respectfully. "I am just doing what anyone would do." The elder shook her head. "No, not anyone, only your kind, only humans." She reached out and touched his hand with her delicate fingers. "We have met many species among the stars. Some were kind, some were cruel, but none were like you. You fight like demons and heal like angels. You burn worlds and then rebuild them. We do not understand you." Doyun smiled gently. "Sometimes we do not understand ourselves." The elder looked at him for a long moment, and then she laughed. It was a soft, broken sound, the first laugh many of the Velani had heard since the nightmare began. "Perhaps that is why we trust you," she said. "You are honest about your confusion." Across the galaxy, the story of Velcora spread. Species that had hidden in fear of the Korath began to emerge from the shadows. Civilizations that had paid tribute to the Slaver Empire suddenly found themselves free. And everywhere, beings looked toward humanity with new eyes. The humans had done what no one thought possible. They had defeated the undefeatable. They had humbled the proud. And then, instead of becoming new tyrants, they had reached out a hand to help. On Korath Prime, the trials of the Dominion leaders began. It was not a human court that judged them, but a joint tribunal made up of representatives from every species the Korath had wronged. Thousands of victims came forward to tell their stories, to name the dead, to demand justice for centuries of cruelty. Admiral Jisuhan attended the trials personally. She sat in the gallery and watched as the beings who had ordered the deaths of millions were held accountable for their crimes. There was no satisfaction in her eyes, no joy in their suffering, only a cold, determined resolve. When the verdicts were announced, the galaxy held its breath. The sentences were severe but fair. The leaders who had ordered the harvests were imprisoned for life. The military commanders who had carried out the atrocities were sentenced to decades of labor, rebuilding the worlds they had destroyed. The Korath Dominion itself was dissolved, its territories placed under the protection of a new galactic council. It was justice, not revenge justice. The Velani who had survived the massacre were given a choice. They could return to Velcora and rebuild their homeworld, or they could find new homes on other planets. Many chose to stay on their ancestral world, determined to heal the land that had been so badly wounded. But others chose a different path. Thousands of Velani accepted the invitation to live on human colony worlds. They were welcomed with open arms by communities across human space. Families who had lost no one in the war opened their homes to refugees who had lost everything. Children who had never met an alien before found themselves with new brothers and sisters who looked different but laughed and cried and dreamed just like them. On the colony world of New Soul, a young Velani child named Pally was adopted by a human family. She had been found alone in the ruins of her city, the only survivor of her entire family. She did not speak for weeks, her large, dark eyes empty of hope. But slowly, day by day, she began to heal. Her new human parents were patient and kind. Her human siblings were curious and friendly. They taught her their games and learned her songs. They showed her that the universe was not only darkness and pain. There was also light and love. One night, as the family sat together watching the stars through their window, Pally spoke for the first time in months. "Why did you save us?" she asked quietly. "We are not your people, we are not even your species. Why did you come when we called?" Her new father, a quiet man named Junho, looked down at her with gentle eyes. "Because that is what good people do," he said. "When someone is hurting, you help them. When someone is in danger, you protect them. It does not matter if they look like you or speak your language or live on your world. What matters is that they need help and you can give it." Pally thought about this for a long time. Then she leaned against his side and closed her eyes. "I want to be like that," she whispered. "When I grow up, I want to help people who need it." Junho smiled and put his arm around her. "Then you will," he said. "I promise." Far away on the bridge of the horizon's edge, Commander Tiho Park stood alone once more. The ship had been repaired since the battle at Velcora, its scars patched over with new metal and fresh paint. But Tiho still felt the weight of everything that had happened. The lives lost, the lives saved, the choices made. Lieutenant Hana Yoon entered the bridge and stood beside him. In her hands, she held a datapad, its screen filled with text. "We are receiving distress calls," she said quietly. "Dozens of them, from species we have never contacted before. They heard what we did at Korath Prime. They heard what we did for the Vellani. Tiho took the datapad and scrolled through the messages. Pleas for help, cries for justice, prayers sent into the void by those who had given up hope long ago. How many? He asked. At least 37 confirmed signals. There may be more. Tiho was silent for a moment. He thought about the Vellani elder who had thanked him through her tears. He thought about Sergeant Yuna and her unwavering courage. He thought about Admiral Han and her iron will. He thought about all the humans who had fought and died in sacrifice so that strangers could live. The galaxy is bigger than we ever imagined, he said finally, and it is full of beings who need someone to stand up for them. He handed the datapad back to Hana. Plot a course for the nearest signal. Inform the crew that shore leave is cancelled. He smiled, tired but determined. It seems we have work to do. Hana nodded and hurried to her station. Around her, the bridge crew came to life, preparing the ship for another mission, another journey into the unknown. As the horizon's edge turned toward the stars, Tiho looked out the window one last time. The universe was vast and dark and full of dangers, but it was also full of hope, full of life, full of possibilities. Humanity had answered one call. Now there were more. There would always be more, and as long as there were humans willing to fly into the darkness, willing to fight for those who could not fight for themselves, willing to stand as guardians against the cruelty of the universe, there would always be someone to answer. The stars waited, the void called, and humanity answered. In the observation deck, Tiho whispered the same words he had spoken weeks ago, when this journey had first begun. Hold on, we are coming. The horizon's edge leaped into the darkness, and the next chapter began.